Yes, it is time for another game of Shelve It or Shove It, the completely superficial way to pick books for your TBR based solely on their cover. I am your host, the booktube goddess, the #1 drag queen booktuber on YouTube. I am going on to Goodreads and looking at the new releases for August, and I'm going to pick at least one to read or to add to my TBR in September. And I'll be looking at young adult, science fiction, and fantasy. Let's get right into it. Starting with young adult, the first book up is The Final Gambit by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. Now, this isn't my favorite type of cover with the title as the feature surrounded by things, but there's always an exception, and this one is an exception because it looks kind of cool with all the chess pieces in jewels surrounded by what there are roses and fire. And there's a tagline that says, "Riddle upon riddles, secrets upon secrets, winner takes all." But it also says an Inheritance Games novel, which makes me think this is part of a series. And since I have not read any of these series, I don't think I'm going to pick it up. But for this type of cover, I think it is pretty cool. Nonetheless, I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Light Lark by Alex Astor. Are you getting Twilight? I'm getting Twilight from it. It has that same type of layout or design. Anyway, there's a heart with flowers. There's vines around it. And all I can think of is a Twilight knockoff. I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is The Dragon's Promise by Elizabeth Lim. Now, I recognize this because I almost picked the first book. I believe this is a series, 6 Crimson Cranes. And because the artwork is exactly the same. I mean, it's a different picture, but the same style. I believe the same girls on it, except in the first book it was cranes, and I'm assuming this is a sequel. Unfortunately, I didn't pick up, I believe it was a contender, but I did not pick up 6 Crimson Cranes. So I have to say I like this artwork. It's almost like a watercolor, and of course this Asian influence. And it looks like a dragon and she's holding an egg, perhaps. I may give this series a chance later, but just based on the cover, mostly based on the fact that I know it's a sequel and I didn't read the first book, I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Nothing More to Tell by Karen McManus. And I recognize the style of this cover too, because I was kind of intrigued by the first cover that had pictures with the X's in the faces. This one is more of the same. I wonder if it's a sequel or just the same author doing another. I believe this is a thriller, obviously set in a school. I don't really do thrillers often, but I think this cover is intriguing if you are into thrillers. Let me know in the comments if you've ever read Karen McManus. But I think for now, I'm going to have to shove it. And finally, in young adult, is Belladonna by Adeline Grace. And it says best-selling author of All the Stars and Teeth, which I've actually read because it was a young adult sort of dark mermaid story. This one has a cover that I am intrigued by because it's this gorgeous face with flowers growing out of it. The vines are like almost veins in the person's skin. I am intrigued by this. So I think I'm going to have to shelve it. Now we move on to science fiction. And first up is The Women Could Fly by Megan Giddings, apparently the author of Lakewood. And okay, it's a pretty cover. The artwork is interesting, but it's not telling me anything about the novel. I have no idea what type of science fiction this could be. So for that reason, I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is, okay, I think the title is Face. It's kind of hard to tell just looking at the cover, but I believe the novel is called Face, and the author is Joma West. And there's a little tagline, popularity is glory. And it's a very abstract cover. It looks like little paper cutouts that perhaps could be faces or people. Like in the negative space, could be a face. I'm going to take a wild guess that maybe this has to do with social media, maybe, or cloning, maybe. As much as I am intrigued by this cover, if I'm only going to pick based on the cover and not read the blurb first, I'm gonna have to give it a pass. I don't really know what's going on, so I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is The Sleepless by Victor Manebo. And I guess it looks like a neon sign, and it looks like 3 types of eyes. The first set are closed eyes and open and wide open. Again, my issue here is I don't really get what type of science fiction this is or anything about the story. Although some of these covers may intrigue me enough to pick up and read the blurb if I was in a bookstore, that's not what this game is. Just based on the cover, I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Meet Us by the Roaring Sea by Kumar. No, I believe the first name is Akhil Kumarasamy. Apologies for butchering the pronunciation. But this is another kind of intriguing cover. Meet Us by the Roaring Sea. Maybe it's an ecological science fiction. Hard to tell because this is made up of little squares. It's hard to tell what it is. I'm assuming weather, the ocean. Author of Half Gods. It's an interesting cover, but again, not getting enough of what it could be about. So I'm going to have to shove it. And now we move on to fantasy. And first up is R.F. Kuang's Babel. And if you've been following me, you know I've actually been waiting for this book to come out. I absolutely adore this cover. It looks like a pen and ink drawing, very detailed, of a tower with birds around it. It says Babel in Arcane History. R.F. Kuang, of course, is the author of one of my favorite series of recent times, The Poppy Wars. And what more can I say? I am very intrigued by this cover, and apparently this is quite unlike The Poppy Wars, which is kind of neat. So I'm, of course, going to have to shelve it. Next up is The Book Eaters by Sunyi Dean. I have heard of this book too, and I am very interested in it because it's about these people that eat books, I believe. And I apologize for knowing more about this book than I should, but the cover is really interesting too. It has a book that's open, but everything is cut out. It looks like pages. There's a woman, a boy, a house. I mean, it's a very intriguing cover, even if I didn't know anything about the story. And boy, I want to read this. Okay, I'm going to have to shelve it. And next up is The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez, author of The Vanished Birds. Not familiar with this author. The cover is intriguing. It looks like crystals, or well, it says water, so I guess we're looking through water. It looks like this hand floating in it and two people fighting within. It's a pretty interesting cover. Not quite getting what this story could be about. I mean, I'm going to guess, since it says spear, that it is very low tech. So maybe a traditional fantasy. Having a little too many questions. Even though I think this is an intriguing cover, I think I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is The First Binding by R.R. Virdi. Every great story begins with a lie, does it? It's a nice fantasy, typical fantasy cover. There's a Jim Butcher recommendation, which is pretty cool, but I am just getting generic fantasy from this. Nice cover, generic fantasy, I think. So for that reason, I'm just going to have to shove it. And finally, A Taste of Gold and Iron by Alexandra Rowland. And this is another pretty cover. Interesting enough, it looks like two men, maybe of different cultures. So I'm getting a gay romance. Maybe. Delicious tangle of romance, fealty, and dangerous politics, says Tasha Suri. So, You know, I like gay representation, of course, but I'm just so afraid this is just going to be a romance novel. It's going to be one of those tropes, maybe about two people meeting from different cultures and getting over their differences, or maybe there's reasons why they need to be enemies, or I don't know. Whoever did this artwork, though, is very, very talented. I just can't do a romance. I'm too afraid this is just going to be a straight up fantasy romance, which never does well for me. So for that reason alone, I'm going to have to shove it. Okay, I have shelved 3 books. Belladonna by Adeline Grace, R.F. Kuang's Babel, and The Book Eaters by Sunyi Dean. I'm not going to do 2 books. I did 2 books last month. I'm not going to do 2 books again this month. I'm just adding too much to my TBR on top of everything else I want to read. So we're just going to do 1 book. I'm going to say no to Belladonna. I did read Adeline Grace's other book before, All the Stars and Teeth, which I thought was well written and was, I believe, her debut, which was very good for a debut. But I wasn't excited enough to pick up the sequel. So we're just looking at 2 fantasies now. I really want to read both, but I'm only going to add 1 to my TBR, which is going to be R.F. Kuang, a known quantity. And I've been really waiting to read Babel or The Book Eaters. And I know a little bit about this already by Sunyi Dean. This is a hard one. This is really hard. Because normally at this point I'd be putting them both on my TBR, but I just want to do 1. It's going to be Babel. It's going to have to be R.F. Kuang's Babel. R.F. Kuang's one of my new favorite authors. Departure from the Poppy Wars. Very interested in it. I've been looking forward to this all year. I'm probably going to end up reading The Book Eaters, but for right now, it's going to just be Babel on my TBR. So let's go ahead and read the entire blurb to see what we've gotten ourselves into. Right off, we get the full title, which I guess didn't fit on the cover, but it's called Babel, or The Necessity of Violence in Arcane History of the Oxford Translators' Revolution. 1828, Robin Swift, orphaned by cholera in Canton, is brought to London by the mysterious Professor Lovell. There he trains for years in Latin, ancient Greek, and Chinese, all in preparation for the day he'll enroll in Oxford University's prestigious Royal Institute of Translation, known as Babel. Babel is a world center of translation and, more importantly, of silverworking, the art of manifesting the meaning lost in translation through enchanted silver bars to magical effect. Silverworking has made the British Empire unparalleled in power, and Babel's research in foreign languages serves the Empire's quest to colonize everything it encounters. Oxford, the city of dreaming spires, is a fairy tale for Robin, a utopia dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. But knowledge serves power, and for Robin, a Chinese boy raised in Britain, serving Babel inevitably means betraying his motherland. As his studies progress, Robin finds himself caught between Babel and the shadowy Hermes Society, an organization dedicated to sabotaging the silverworking that supports imperial expansion. When Britain pursues an unjust war with China over silver and opium, Robin must decide: can powerful institutions be changed from within? Or does revolution always require violence? What is he willing to sacrifice to bring Babel down? Babel, a thematic response to The Secret History and a tonal response to Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, grapples with student revolutions, colonial resistance, and the use of translation as a tool of empire. I cannot wait to start Babel. Chinese immigrant, the British Empire during their colonization phase, the evils thereof. This great question: should organizations be changed from within, or do you need violence from without to change it? I am so into this, but what book would you have picked just based on the cover? Let me know down in the comments. And while you're there, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.